Good evening. Welcome to Thursday night Bible study here at Forest Chapel. I'm Pastor David, and welcome to our evening study or our online study. We're continuing our journey through all of the books of the Bible, covering them all in the space of a year. And just as a little bit of a review, it's been a couple of weeks since we've been on the study due to vacations and other things going on. But this is a study that very quickly covers each of the books of the Bible because we are on a time schedule to try to complete them all within a week or within a year. Tonight we are looking at the book of the prophet Daniel. Now, Daniel, we'll look first at Daniel the man, and I'm going to share our outline for the evening. With you. This is going to be our general outline that we will be looking at. We're going to look at Daniel the man. We're going to look at the book, the central truth, the structure of the book, which is actually pretty simple, as you will see. Daniel and Revelation, a lot of parallels between Daniel and Revelation. The dream of Nebuchadnezzar and the vision of Daniel. The golden image, and in chapter 9, and that should be Daniel's 70 weeks. And then we'll look at our quiz for the day. But that will be our outline. Now, looking at the man Daniel. Last week we were looking at the book of the prophet Ezekiel. And Ezekiel was a prophet who was a prophet to the people who were in exile in Babylon. Now, about 8 years before Ezekiel was taken captive, Daniel was taken captive. And let's look again. This should look familiar if you watched our online study from the other week of Ezekiel. And what we have here is a drawing of the path of the Jewish exiles in Babylonia. Now, this is the path that the exiles from Judah. Remember, there were two kingdoms in Israel. There was the northern kingdom called Israel. There was the southern kingdom called Judah. Israel was the first kingdom to fall, and the Assyrians are actually who carried them off. And they were carried off from this area of Israel, and they were carried up and around and then out towards Assyria. And this is where those exiles would have been. But this is 100 years or so later that the southern kingdom falls, and it falls to the Babylonians, who by this time are now the world power. And so they are taken up even with the coastline of the Mediterranean, and then and then after traveling north, turning west and then or east and then south and heading to Babylon, where the exiles will be spread out there. This is all part of the same deportation, even though it happens over a number of years. Daniel is in the first group to go. Ezekiel is in another group that goes. Now, Daniel was likely between the ages of 10 and 18 or 17 when he was taken captive. He would end up living a very long life for people of that time. He would live well into his 80s and perhaps as much as 90. Daniel was young, he was intelligent, he was skillful, he had a lot of wisdom, and those were things that the Babylonians were looking for when they would capture people and take them into exile. They were looking for the best or the cream of the crop, because they would use them in various places in their government or in their offices. Daniel's one of the few men in the Bible about whom God says only good things. There are 3 times that Daniel is referred to as the beloved one. Now, there were 3 other young men who were taken into captivity along with Daniel, and they also, because of their intelligence, because of their ability. Now, you've likely heard of them by their Babylonian names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The name Daniel means God is judge. Now let's take a look at the book itself. Daniel is the Old Testament apocalypse. It is to the Old Testament what Revelation is to the New Testament. The word apocalypse means the unveiling of the truths of God, or an unveiling of the secret purposes of God. That's what an apocalypse means. The secret purposes of God can never be known until they are revealed. And the way in which the events are unveiled in Daniel is mainly through visions that God gives to Daniel. In the book of Daniel, the word vision or visions appears 32 times. Now, the themes that we see in Daniel are also themes that we see in New Testament prophecy. The appearance of the man of sin, or the beast, the Antichrist, if you will. Also, the great tribulation, the return of the Lord, the resurrection, and the judgments. All of those are a part of Daniel, just as they are in New Testament prophecy. Daniel is clearly the prophet of the times of the Gentiles. Jesus referred to that in Luke 21, verse 24. Luke chapter 21 and verse 24. They will fall by the sword and will be taken as prisoners to all the nations. Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. This includes these times of the Gentiles. This includes the times in which we are now living. The vision of Daniel sweeps the entire course of time that the Gentile world would rule all the way to its end, and then on to the kingdom of the Messiah when Jesus returns as the Messiah. The central truth of the book of Daniel, that the Most High rules in the kingdoms of men. It may be the times of the Gentiles, but God still rules. That the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomsoever he will. That's from Daniel chapter 4, several places. The theme is actually very similar to the theme of Ezekiel, the other book of the captivity. Ezekiel's theme is, they shall know that I am Jehovah. The basic structure of the book of Daniel, it can be divided into 2 sections. One that is very historical, and that's chapters 1 through 6. And the second section, chapters 7 through 12, which is prophecy. Now, the historical section does reveal God's plan to Daniel and all of that plan. And that speaks of the immediate future. The prophetical things that are related in chapters 1 through 6 are prophecies of things that happen immediately and do take place. The 6 chapters are not just history, but they look to a distant fulfillment. For example, chapter 3 tells the story of the 3 Hebrew children in the fiery furnace, but it's also a picture of Israel in the furnace of tribulation. Chapter 2 shares the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, and most of that is history, but it does look to the end of the times of the Gentiles, as we'll see shortly. The prophetic section, chapters 7 through 12, that deals with the events, basically, of the age in which we live and the events of the end of time. Now, Daniel and Revelation. The book of Daniel can't be fully understood without the book of Revelation. And it's the same with Revelation. You almost need to read them paired together. They complement each other. Both of these men were loved by the Lord, and both of them saw visions that God gave them while they were in exile. Daniel was a captive in Babylon, and John was in exile on the island of Patmos. 5 times in Revelation, we read that it is a prophecy. Daniel is a prophet, and Jesus referred to Daniel as a prophet in Matthew 24, verse 15. There is much that was sealed in Daniel that is unsealed in Revelation. Let's compare Daniel chapter 12, verses 8 and 9. Daniel 12, verses 8 and 9. I heard, but I did not understand. So I asked, my Lord, what will the outcome of all this be? He replied, go your way, Daniel, because the words are closed up and sealed until the time of the end. And let's compare them with Revelation chapter 5, verses 1 through 5. Then I saw in the right hand of him who sat on the throne a scroll with writing on both sides and sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a mighty angel proclaiming in a loud voice, who is worthy to break the seals and open the scroll? But no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth could open the scroll or even look inside it. I wept and wept because no one was found who was worthy to open the scroll or look inside. Then one of the elders said to me, do not weep. See, the Lion, the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has triumphed. He is able to open the scroll and its 7 seals. What was hidden from the eyes of Daniel is made open to see in Revelation. Now let's look at Nebuchadnezzar's dream and Daniel's vision. Now, Nebuchadnezzar's dream we see in chapter 2. Daniel's vision is in chapter 7. Now I'm going to pull up a chart. Charts tend to make things easier to understand. Let me clear out of that and start again. And here we go with our chart. And we have on the right Daniel's vision, and on the left the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. Each of them, the fulfillment for Nebuchadnezzar, it's a dream, an image In Daniel's vision, it is 4 beasts. They each deal with world powers, what shall come to pass hereafter in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and in Daniel's dream as well, dealing with world powers. The organization of these world powers, and these are all in order as these powers come to be. Babylon would be the major world force, followed by Medo-Persia, followed by the Greeks, of course, followed by the Romans, and then we have Jesus, the Ancient of Days, as the stone or the rock. In Daniel's vision, he's referred to as the Ancient of Days. In Nebuchadnezzar's dream, he's is the stone. And then the kingdom, which is the everlasting kingdom, the millennial kingdom. In Daniel's vision, it's referred to as the everlasting kingdom. In Nebuchadnezzar's dream, that is represented by the mountain. The 10 toes here in the old Roman Empire deal with, are similar to what Daniel sees as the 10 horns, and that deals with the 10 parts of the old Roman Empire. The bellies and thighs in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and the leopard in Daniel's vision, and each of those representing Greece. Representing Medo-Persia is the bear, and the breasts and the arms of this great image that Nebuchadnezzar sees, representing Medo-Persia. Babylon represented by the lion and represented by the head of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And hopefully that helps make some of these similarities a little easier to look at and understand, especially in terms of their prophetic nature and what they represent. And as always, I encourage you to, if you're watching this, to take a picture of the chart. That can help you a lot with understanding. I'm a great fan of charts. They put things in order, things that maybe get talked about, and once they are on a chart, and it's easier to understand and compare things. The 4 kingdoms, symbolized by the great image and the beasts, were literal kingdoms. And then it would follow that the stone kingdom, mentioned at the end, which is to take place, is also a literal kingdom, the millennial kingdom of Jesus as king. Psalm 118, verses 22 through 23. The stone the builders rejected has become the capstone. The Lord has done this, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Jesus as the stone or the rock. Luke chapter 20, verses 17 and 18. Jesus looked directly at them and asked, "Then what is the meaning of that which is written? The stone the builders rejected has become the capstone. Everyone who falls on that stone will be broken to pieces, but he on whom it falls will be crushed." We also have in Daniel, in his dealings with Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was a very interesting monarch there in Babylon, who wavered back and forth between his belief in the Babylonian gods and idols and a somewhat of a belief in the God of Daniel. He was also very prone to an elevated sense of himself. He builds this golden image to perpetuate himself. That's in Daniel chapter 3. And he demands that the people worship this image. And 3 Hebrew children refuse to obey, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they are thrown into the fiery furnace. But God makes the flames harmless. They are not hurt. Daniel chapter 3, verse 25. There is a 4th person there in the fire. King Nebuchadnezzar asks, weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire? And then in verse 25, he said, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods. The 4th person is, of course, Jesus walking with them. Hebrews 11, verses 33 through 34 is a great chapter on faith and on the people of faith. Sometimes it's called the roll call of faith or the honor roll of faith. Hebrews 11, verses 33 and 34. The prophets who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, had escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames. Through faith. The beginning of that in verse 3, who through faith. How are we saved? We are saved through faith. In Daniel chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream of a great tree. We don't have time to go into all of that story, but Daniel again interprets the dream, and it comes about exactly as God had revealed it. The king is stricken with madness for 7 years, and that represents the 7 years of tribulation. The stump of the tree is spared, and after 7 years, it sprouts, and that represents the Gentile nations whose knees will bow when they seek out the Lord. Acts chapter 15, verses 14 through 18. Acts 15, verses 14 through 18. Simon has described to us how God at first showed his concern by taking from the Gentiles a people to himself. The words of the prophets are in agreement with this, as it is written, after this I will return and rebuild David's fallen tent. Its ruins I will rebuild and I will restore it, that the remnant of man may seek the Lord, and all the nations who bear my name, says the Lord who does these things that have been known for ages. Daniel chapter 5 has an accounting of the handwriting on the wall. That's a phrase that is a common phrase in our English language, but here again, it's one that comes straight out of Scripture. So if you want to go back and read over that, you can see what that entails. Daniel chapter 5. Daniel chapter 6 has the very familiar story of Daniel in the lion's den and God delivering him from the lions. In verses 26 through 28, following that experience, Daniel is promoted within the government of Babylon. In Daniel chapter 8 are details for the second and third kingdoms, that of Medo-Persia and of Greece. Chapter 9 deals with the 70 weeks. It's one of the most important chapters in the Bible. The angel Gabriel, in verse 21, gives the divine revelation. And in verses 24 through 27, we have the revelation. So Daniel chapter 9, and we're going to be looking at verses 24 through 27. "70 sevens are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for weakness, to bring an everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Know and understand this. From the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the anointed one, the ruler, comes, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. It will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble. After the 62 sevens, the anointed one will be cut off and will have nothing. The people of the ruler who will come and destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on a wing of the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him." So there is the revelation of the 70 sevens. In Daniel's 70 weeks, there is a week for each 70 years, 7 days for each 70 years, making the time period 490 years. Jeremiah chapter 11, or Jeremiah chapter 25, verses 11 through 12. This whole country will become a desolate wasteland, and these nations will serve the king of Babylon 70 years. But when the 70 years are fulfilled, I will punish the king of Babylon and his nation, the land of the Babylonians, for their guilt, declares the Lord, and will make it desolate forever. And then Leviticus chapter 26, verses 33 through 34. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus 26, verses 33 to 34. I will scatter you among the nations and will draw out my sword and pursue you. Your land will be laid waste and your cities will lie in ruins. Then the land will enjoy its Sabbath years all the time that it lies desolate. And you are in the country of your enemies. Then the land will rest and enjoy its Sabbaths. Now, Scripture divides these 70 weeks into 3 divisions with a pause. The church age is that pause in between. That's the period in which we live. In Daniel 9, verse 25, which we read, the 7 weeks begins with the command that God gave to Ezra and Nehemiah to restore and to rebuild Jerusalem. This actually happens, and for that number of years, as we saw in Ezra and Nehemiah. The next 62 weeks, or 434 years, from 396 BC to 38 AD, The Messiah is cut off. The Messiah is crucified. Daniel chapter 9 and verse 26. After the 62 sevens, the anointed one will be cut off and will have nothing. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. Then there is one that leaves 1 week left, the 70th week, and it is set apart between the 69th and the 70th week. There is an interlude, and that is what we call the church age. Daniel 9, verse 27 refers to it as in the middle of the week. The covenant is broken by the Antichrist with Israel. The last 7-year period is the tribulation, and it's divided into two 3.5-year periods, 42 months or 1,260 days. At the end of all of the 70 weeks, in other words, after the tribulation, then Jesus will return. The 70th week, the tribulations, it has not begun yet. But as we watch the world events, we can't help wondering if it's not far away. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 13 through 18. Brothers, we do not want you to be ignorant about those who fall asleep, or to grieve like the rest of men who have no hope. We believe that Jesus died and rose again, and so we believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep in him. According to the Lord's own word, we tell you that we who are still alive, who are left till the coming of the Lord, will certainly not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet call of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. After that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will be with the Lord forever. Therefore, encourage each other with these words. A chart here would be helpful as we talk about these days and the weeks. Let's go first, just to give you an idea of where we're talking about time-wise. In our studies, we have looked at from Genesis through Exodus, creation, flood, Tower of Babel. We then moved in Genesis to God calling a people to himself in the call of Abraham and Isaac. And then we travel with them to Egypt, then the Exodus out of Egypt, and we followed Moses and Joshua, and in the period of Judges, and then the beginnings of the kingdoms, and beginning with the first king Saul. And then we see David coming along, and then the other kings going off into exile. Then happens in this neighborhood, there's Daniel from roughly 6 O's to around the year 500. So Daniel is easily 85, 90 years old. These are the 70 years of captivity. So we are currently within, now in our study, within about 500 years of the birth of Christ. So just to help you along with an understanding of our timeline. Now let's go back and see the second chart. And here we have our okay, there it is. Sorry for the pause. Well, wrong one again. The correct one does not seem to want to come up. So we will continue along, and we will go ahead and look at our quiz time for the book of Daniel. And here we go. Who went with Daniel into captivity? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Revelation and Daniel are alike in what way? They both deal with apocalypse, and apocalypse meaning the secret purposes of God that are revealed. Now, why were their Hebrew names changed? We didn't really discuss this in our discussion this evening, but if you were reading, but if you've read through Daniel, you would notice that their names were changed. The purpose in changing their names, and Daniel's name was changed as well. His name was changed to Belteshazzar. The purpose was changing them to Babylonian names because they wanted to wean them away from their land. They wanted to kind of get rid of all the thoughts of Israel and Jerusalem and their heritage as Jews, and destroy their faith in God to get them to become good Babylonians and adopt the religion and habits of Babylon. That was the purpose of the name changes. Now, in what sense was Daniel different from other prophets? Actually, in several ways, but one being that he was a prophet of apocalypse, and also his that God spoke to him so much through dreams. Daniel is prophet of the times of the Gentiles. How long was Daniel in Babylon? Well, we know he was there at least 70 years. We don't have any record of him going back when the exiles returned to Jerusalem, but at that time he probably was not at an age where he was able to travel much. He probably was not far from the end of his life at that point. So he was there at least 70 years. What does 70 weeks mean in years? 490. 490. Well, I hope you have enjoyed our study this evening. I apologize for the technical issue on pulling up that share. But hope this journey through Daniel has been informational for you. Next week, we will be looking at three of the minor, what we call the minor prophets. The minor prophets, important to remember, minor prophets were called that not because they're any less important in their writings, but simply because the books are smaller, which is why we're going to be covering three of them next week. So read ahead. Hope you have a blessed week. And please find yourself in church on Sunday. If you don't have a home church, I invite you to join us at Forest Chapel. We are right across the road from Sammy's Station in good old downtown Cremora. Take care and be blessed.